thank you everybody for attending this webinar today. I'm really appreciative to Dr. Jones, who reached out to see how Spectre and Frontiers Clinical and Translational Science Institute might be able to collaborate. And so this is one of the ways in which we are going to begin to do so. And so it is with pleasure that I'd like to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Jerica Burge. She is professor with tenure and vice chair for research in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at one of my alma maters, the University of Minnesota. She is had multiple responsibilities. She's the director of the Healthy Eating and Activity Across the Lifespan Center and the principal investigator of the Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health K-12 Award, which trains early career faculty. And it's particularly appropriate for this initiative to connect Spectre and Frontiers, that she's also the co-director of the Community and Collaborations Core in the CTSI at the University of Minnesota Medical School. She's a particularly prolific author in the area of child and family health. And we really appreciate the opportunity that we have to hear her perspectives on mentoring. And in particular, I think people will be pleased to hear her perspectives on coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Burge, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation and am happy to share with you some of the things that have worked for me in my career around mentoring. So I'm going to get started here. I am specifically focusing on mentoring early stage investigators or junior faculty from underrepresented in medicine and science areas. And as you heard a little bit about me already, I'll move into what I want to share today. So there's two things I think will be helpful as far as what I'd like to share with you today. And that is, first of all, talking a little bit about my guiding approach to mentoring. And then secondly, the application of my mentoring and what that looks like on a day-to-day, day in the life, so to speak, basis. To start then, my guiding approach, I think, is composed of three things. And that is, first of all, it's part of my career mission and vision. And I lead with a theoretical model, and then I have a clear understanding of my role. So I'm going to take some time to really look at each one of these pieces here to help break it down. So what I mean by part of my career vision and mission is that it's very intentionally placed in my career path and the choices that I make in what I do as part of my career. So for example, in the second bullet point, you'll see my vision statement. So you'll see the first part really talks about the type of research that I do, which is to achieve equitable whole person health for children and families. And then the second part that I think is really important that, again, shows this intentionality of mentoring in my career is that I mentor others in this approach. And I think as people take on the role as a mentor, being clear that that is part of their vision statement is showing the intentionality of that in their career path. The other thing is it really directs what I do. So since it's part of my vision, the grants I go for, the types of positions that I take, I always have that thought about how will mentoring be built into this and how will that make sense in what I choose. The other thing is that I have to be very clear that I understand there's these bi-directional benefits. So not only is it my responsibility to really provide the skill sets or the types of opportunities that I need to do as a mentor, I definitely have to acknowledge and recognize that there's benefits that I'm receiving from my mentees. So very much innovative, creative ideas, fresh perspectives. They bring so many different talents to my career as well that I have to very much recognize that there's these bi-directional benefits. So as I bring into my career vision, I also pair it with a theoretical model. Like any good approach to clinic or education or research, having a strong theoretical model helps you do a better job at what you do. So for mentoring, I have two frameworks that really guide my approach. The first one is an intersectionality framework, and then the second is an academic life course and trajectory approach. So intersectionality, this picture shows the intersectionality flower that some of you may be familiar with. And as a kind of general synopsis, intersectionality, the framework posits that social positions that exist on a hierarchy of social powers are not independent, and they ultimately shape human experience jointly. And so if you look on the petals on the intersectionality flower in the middle, those social positions intersect at the individual level. So we have race and gender and education and geography and all of the petals there. And then the experiences at those intersections are influenced by those larger structural systems. So the gray ring around it, those structural systems of oppression, such as racism or discrimination, classism, as you are in those identities and having lived experiences, those two interact. And so I'm very transparent in my approach with regard to my own identities that I bring to that experience, as well as the mentees that come and work with me. And I think especially with faculty and trainees from underrepresented medicine backgrounds, this is important and intentional. And you'll see as I talk more about it, how much I think it's a strength base that is brought to the spaces that they're in and how they show up and in the applications that they write. The other thing about intersectionality is this acknowledgement and intentionality about having a community of mentors approach. So it's important to have a dyadic mentor-mentee relationship, and that I think can't be understated. I think that's a really important relationship. And at the same time, you often might have multiple of those throughout a career, and you may come in and out of them. You might have different roles that you play. You'll hear me later talk about coaching and sponsorship, and they are all part of your community of mentors. And so understanding that there is this community, and I would include peers in that as well. You have peer mentors. The key thing, though, is that you need someone who is helping to coordinate that community of mentors. And so as the mentee, you might identify one mentor who helps to coordinate all those different mentors within that community of your mentors. So that's a key part that I think is important, that most people can agree a community of mentors is a great approach. It's just often people can feel like they get lost in that. And so there needs to be a key person who's helping to coordinate all those mentors. So the second framework that goes with this is the academic, I'll talk about in a second, but the academic or career life course approach that is also incorporating a trajectory. And so I pair those together. Before that, though, I wanted to acknowledge that when I do work in this intersectional framework, the idea and importance of transparency is key. And so I always, when we are entering a mentee relationship, talk about those identities that I bring with me. And so I have them listed here. Ones that I like to also highlight that don't always get thought through or brought through clearly, that I think also often lead to important conversations in a mentor-mentee relationship, have to do with caregiver, and then also your the degree that you bring depending on which context you're in. So caregiving status for me right now is children, but in soon near future might be aging parents, as well as being a PhD in an MD world. And so I have the mentees that I work with think about all those different identities that play into their experience and how they show up in all of the work that they do. So here's the second one that I was mentioning, an academic life course approach that builds in a trajectory. So especially when I do the work in this realm and with underrepresented in medicine and science mentees, I reach way back in the trajectory of an academic life course. And so I have high school through junior faculty represented here, but I would say that I definitely extend beyond that and have moved into middle school and even elementary school with this approach and way I think about it. And then, of course, moving further into mid-career and late career, there's still that importance of mentoring going on. But the examples I'll share with you today mostly focus on this trajectory. So I wanted to show you this approach. What I think is key about this is that if you're able to think about a trajectory more in this longitudinal way, that you're able to support and scaffold people for a lot longer and have a bigger impact on their career. So I want to now share mentee highlights, and throughout my presentation, I wanted to weave in some of those examples to really bring home or reinforce some of the ways in which I approach mentoring. So in this first example, I'm highlighting on the left-hand side those two frameworks I was talking about earlier. So identifying multiple identities in which the mentee might be bringing to the relationship, as well as the ones you just saw for me. And then the life course or stage of career that this person is in was high school. So as I get started, I wanted to acknowledge also that while I tried to de-identify all of these characteristics, it's possible that you might be able to recognize one of these mentees. And so I did ask permission to share these, even though I won't share names or things like that. So in this situation, this is a mentee who I was able to reach out to early on, so early in high school. And as you heard earlier, the CTSI was mentioned. So Clinical Translational Science Awards at different institutions have these institutes called Clinical Translational Science Institutes. And within those institutes, they often have opportunities for mentoring students. And so in this case, our CTSI does have a summer program where high school students are able to be a part of it. And so I intentionally make sure that I'm a part of that program in which I mentor high school students. And if I don't through that program, I intentionally reach out anyways to bring in every summer at least a high school student to my research. And so in this case, I identified that this was a great opportunity for this student, worked really hard to put an application together. So really from beginning to end, looked at the application together, sketched out an outline and went back and forth tag teaming this application. Similarly, as I mentioned earlier, really talked through the importance of the different identities that this person's bringing to the space. It shows up in the application in a really strong way. And as we put the application together, it was successful. And then we were able to have that summer opportunity to really start to build a mentoring relationship. And then as we had that opportunity together, we started building her community of mentors. And so my expertise aligned a lot with her methods, her mixed methods approach. And there was other content area that she wanted a little more expertise with. And so we built other mentors in this community of mentors approach during her program, during her time in this program, rather. And as she was finishing just even this experience before she even went on to undergrad, she really had that really strong support to move into that next part of her life. And so fast forward to today, this person now has gone on to grad school, and I have continued to be one of the mentors in the community of mentors of hers, but she's shifted to this other person that we met in that summer programming as a main mentor, given a really strong alignment with the content. And so I think this is a really good example of how often you might start out as one of those main mentors, but then as the community of mentors grow, someone else might shift into that position, but importance of communicating and making sure that it's clear who's doing what role. All right, I'm going to move to the second part of how I view my approach to mentoring, and that is understanding, or the third part rather, is understanding my role on the continuum of mentoring. So as you see here, I really view this as having three key types of roles that someone might play as a mentor. And as I talk about them, you'll see that a mentor could, in fact, do all three things. That might be a possibility and something that makes sense for a mentor. At the same time, it's often even more advantageous that they don't necessarily do that, because again, you can grow your community of mentors, as well as you'll see with sponsorship, there's some strong advantage to have multiple people playing multiple roles. So I'm going to dig deeper in each of these three. So first, coaching, just as it sounds, is really working on a very specific skill set with someone, any trainee or learner, junior faculty, across a large spectrum from clinical skills to teaching to research, etc. A common one in research is grantsmanship and doing a specific limited time frame in which you work on a grant together, for instance. And it may continue into something more, but it might be just learning how to put in a specific grant. They often are usually short-term relationships. And I think of them as one of the community of mentors in those larger community of mentors. Now, coaching also can look like at many institutions, they have grant writing seminars, for instance, and the person teaching that becomes a coach, for instance. And so there's many ways coaching might show up in an opportunity for a mentee. And I think it's really important, again, that it's clear what that role is. So I wanted to do another example of a coaching highlight that I had been involved with. And so on the left-hand side, you can see again, from the two different frameworks that I lead with, the academic life course. This was a postdoc student who identifies as BIPOC, a gay man, and a PhD in an MD world, which is similar to myself, and how to navigate that context of being a PhD. So in this case, the relationship was really about grantsmanship. And so there was a specific grant mechanism in which I had a specific institute they wanted to apply to that, again, I had funding from. And so it really made sense for us to connect and do this. And I should say that these types of opportunities come my way in many different ways. So sometimes people will reach out to me on seeing me on a website or my information on a website or at conferences, or after they, look me up in other ways. And, I might get an email from them. Other ways I also am keeping on my radar at all the time, and is that I am also constantly looking and reaching out to others who might be potential really great fits for the mentoring that I do. So the way in which I met this person was that we were both there was a conference actually that we were both attending, and it was a presentation that we were at, and we had this like mutual friendship with the presenter. And so as we started talking, we realized that this was a grant that this person wanted to go for, and that I could potentially fill the role as a coach. So I helped to work really hand in hand on that specific grant mechanism with them, and made it, tried to make it to that point of being very competitive, helped coordinate a mock review for that person. And then throughout the time together, it was very much clear our transparency in my role as a coach in the community mentoring group of his. And we also talked very much about a timeline. And with a grant, of course, as you know, you'll submit, and then there'll be opportunities to resubmit that always come your way. And so in this case, that was the case. We had originally talked about that we would have this coaching relationship to get this grant in. And then, of course, dependent on acceptance or needing to revise and resubmit, we would lengthen our time. And so we did, in fact, do an 18-month is what it turned out to be by the time it was resubmitted and successfully funded. And so again, a very, very specific timeline, fulfilled a specific role. And then at the end of coaching opportunities, I always have a wrap-up conversation that helps kind of situate and, what is next steps in our relationship and what that might look like. So the next role is sponsorship. This is a term that's been around for quite a while, actually. It's not a brand new role, but it's been maybe underutilized or underappreciated. And so as you can see here, this is really a role in which someone who is situated in a high potential organization or has some leadership roles that is in the public more, that can help move forward the career of someone else that is called a protege. And so in this role, it's really important being able to advance that protege's career is really how you think about it. I wanted to show you some study findings around the importance of sponsorship. These are data from a study that was looking at successful K-08 and K-23 recipients. So they had received these K awards in this time frame of 2006 to 2009. And then the study really looked at the importance of how sponsorship played out in their ability to get a successful R01 after their K. And so you can see here on this table that sponsorship, first of all, shows up as important. And then you'll also see some importance around some gender disparities. Those who had sponsorship had a higher percent, both in men and women, of getting funded. So the 72.5% and 59% are higher than the percents of those who got funded who didn't have sponsorship. And then, of course, between the disparity I was talking about earlier shows up here too, with men who had sponsorship having a higher successful rate. So again, a part of being successful is having sponsors. And so whether your mentor can play that role or not, in addition to mentorship, is an important question for you to ask yourself. So to distinguish between the two, I wanted to throw up how I view mentorship. And it really moves into this longitudinal frame and takes on a developmental arrangement with a lot of scaffolding along the way. And you have more as you first start, pull away, add more if there's new areas that need some of that scaffolding. I mentioned already a community effort, and also the importance of matching content or expertise is really key here. And so often when I decide to either coach or sponsor someone and not be a mentor, it's usually because of the less good fit with regard to my content expertise, and that someone else could do a better job of that longitudinally with them, but then I'll take the role of a sponsor instead often. So one way to get an even clearer view of a difference between a mentor or a sponsor are on this table here, and you can see some of them I've already mentioned, and so I won't go back over those, but I wanted to lift up a few others. So here's one that talks about the mentor's role, in which you can think about that they're part of trying to help the mentee craft a career vision, and really figuring out, drafting it, figuring out the nuances of it, how to reword it, how to make it short enough, how to make it strong enough. They do a lot of that labor in really getting to a clear vision. Whereas a sponsor really helps to drive that protege's career vision. So once it's created, they then help to move it forward. And like I said before, it's not that a mentor can't do that. It's just really an advantage to have others who are, their main role is sponsoring, so that you have multiple people out there looking for ways in which they can help you advance your career. The other example here is that mentors offer insight on how a mentee can increase visibility through finding key projects and people. So they are connectors, trying to help you identify those people, whereas a sponsor often puts that protege out there and has visibility using their own platforms or their own reputation for exposure, and that's their key role. And so they're making those connections to high profile people intentionally to really directly impact the career of that protege. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on what makes a good sponsor or a good protege, because this may be a newer area for some of you. So for a sponsor, it really is thinking about the position of power and influence that this person might have in institutions and organizations. There's key people that you know that can make choices or decisions, and those are the type of people that you should be looking for. They can recognize talent and emerging leadership in an inclusive manner, and so really can see how to plug people in a really strategic way. And one thing that I think is really important is, this is a very concrete example, but they maintain like lists of awards and leadership opportunities, and have in mind promising proteges who they are putting forward in a timely manner for these different awards and leadership opportunities. So that's what you look for if you're looking for a sponsor. So how would you go about being a good protege? And these are a few ideas. One is because you're working with someone who is at that level of high profile, like all of us, we have limited time, but they often have even more limited time. And so you really need to be accountable for those outcomes. If they're putting you forward for an award or a leadership opportunity, that you're following up quickly and making sure that you're accountable for what comes out of those things. Prepared for taking on new challenges and really able to collaborate on those application materials. So as that person's working towards moving you forward, that you're actively really engaged in moving them forward in a timely manner as well. So with that, I want to share an example that might highlight a little more even how this looks. So this is a junior faculty that I worked with that identifies as from a BIPOC background, who's a woman who's a caregiver of young children, and then a first-generation college student. So in this situation, this faculty had approached me about being a mentor. And as I said earlier, that one of the key things I do is think critically about, in my job, like how many mentors or mentees I can take on to do a really good job. And then if it's the right content area expertise to really advance that person's career. So we talked about it and realized that I was actually better as a sponsor. And so part of my job of what I do is I do maintain a list, as I was mentioning before, of awards and leadership opportunities. And so in this case, this is a person that I had known, again, I had reached out to and known for a little while and had kept on my radar. And so a couple of years before I wanted to nominate them for this award, I reached out about it. And so that's another key thing, is that if you're going to be a sponsor and maintain this list of awards, you need to be thinking a few years out. And so if you're nominating someone for an award, you often start working with them about that, year and a half to 2 years before, which allows you opportunities to then have to build up this application in a way that will be really competitive. So in this situation, it was for an early stage investigator award. And so as I had worked with her a couple of years in the past, we really worked on looking at inviting her to do presentation opportunities with me. There was some overlap in our area of research, so that when I was invited to do a special presentation at a conference, I just invited her along with me and had her be a part of that presentation. And so then she was able to have on her resume that she did an invited presentation, for instance, opportunities for co-authorship. And then as the award got closer to being the time to nominate, there is often letters of support, of course, that have to be written besides just the one person nominating. And so a key role that a sponsor can do is write an advocate email. And so what this might look like is, in this case with her, I reached out to another senior person in a really high profile position and said, I'm writing this email as an advocate for so-and-so. For an award I'd like to nominate her for as an early stage investigator. And so that's very powerful, because it's me asking on behalf and putting someone else forward versus that junior faculty having to approach them and ask for that. And so as I bridge that and become that advocate, showing that I'm going to support and that I would like to invite them to support, it makes a huge difference. I also put on here leadership opportunities. So I do think that's important, but I do think about them with caution when stage of career still is junior faculty. And so pick and choose and encourage to take on specific leadership opportunities. Again, if it's really in alignment with the mission vision of their stage of career, and if it will be useful in moving towards these awards or research grants or things like that. So in her case, there was an opportunity that she was able, it was a short-term leadership opportunity, but with high notoriety that would then really look good on this award that she would get as an early stage investigator. So again, fast forward, this award did go in and she did get that early stage investigator award successfully. And to this day, I do continue to be on that community mentoring team as a sponsor. Okay, now I want to shift gears and go into how I apply mentoring. So I just spent some time about how I think about mentoring and the important roles and how theory kind of guides the way in which I approach it. I want to show a little bit more about how this looks in the way that I work in mentoring. So the first one, I've just come up with for myself a way to think about this easily. And so I talk about them as the 4 C's. And the first one's commitment. And so this goes along a lot with my earlier point of intentionally making this a part of your career and what you do and how much effort you're going to put into it. And for this one, I think it's really important to be clear when you take on maybe it's a faculty position, in your communication with your department chair or others that you work with, what efforts you're going to be doing as part of mentoring, because it's not often thought of in the same way as other obligations, right? So it gets lumped in with service. And so I think it's important to really distinctly draw out how it is different and that it has its own line as far as effort in an intentional way. And then what I usually do is I connect it with some kind of grant so that those that I'm working with can see that the role of mentoring is key to what I do, but it also is advancing the science and the evidence base around mentoring. So as I think all these things through, I think it's really important to provide infrastructure. So as you think about the efforts you want to put into it, how many mentees and men can you do to do a really strong job to commit to this? I then map it onto infrastructure. So I wanted to share with you that there's quite a few grant supporting mechanisms, and these are NIH specific, but there's others out there that literally that you put that application forward to do mentoring. And so the grant that comes with it brings that prestige. And so then as you think about how mentoring is looked upon as a service activity, it gets lifted up a little in prestige as far as an actual grant funded mechanism. So I listed several on here. R25s, we have one of these in our department, one of my colleagues has, that is intended to be high school specific. And so it's really bringing up high school students from underrepresented communities in medicine and science for training. And so again, it's a grant that then allows you to mentor and train. R38 are specifically for residency programs. And that is one, in which that is really key for departments like myself in family medicine that run residency programs. T32s, I know that's not maybe a new one for everyone, but it's a great one that pays for, again, mentoring of students. And KL2s, those of course are connected to the CTSI, and then the K12s. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on that one because that is the one in which I am in a PI on for the Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health. And so that allows for, again, mentoring junior faculty to become independent researchers with regard to sex differences in women's health research with a equity frame. And so it really just allows me to do my job to help mentor and have a grant effort behind it. The other thing I do on a very regular basis is add diversity supplements to my existing NIH awards. So again, this is something that's not necessarily new, like sponsoring, but has maybe been unknown for a while how to do it. And different institutes have done it more or less. But in all of my R01s, I will add diversity supplements, and usually more than one. Most of them have 2 or 3 diversity supplements on them. And so again, there's money that comes for you to have the diversity supplement for your student who's underrepresented in medicine and science. So an infrastructure to pay for mentoring that then helps advance their career because there's a project that goes with it. And then there's the mentoring team around them in that same vein as a community mentoring approach. And so it really provides that infrastructure and then the scaffolding needed to really move forward mentees in their career. NIH administrative supplements also can be used in that way. There's one that actually came out not very long ago that was specific to mentoring faculty from underrepresented in medicine and science backgrounds. So those have happened, and I assume will continue to, and maybe even more going forward. And then the one that I know for sure NHLBI does, but I don't know about all the other institutes, a K24, which is an award to do mentoring in more mid or senior career. And so really what it does is it helps you have to have an existing like R01 or other mechanism that what you're proposing to do allows you to buy out your time to do mentoring. Because often clearly on an R01, you only have enough effort to really do your research. And that's always usually really even a small amount of time. And so this mentoring award buys out your time as a mentor to do mentoring. It just has to be attached to another grant in which the mentees you bring on can use data or be part of that project. So it's another great opportunity. And then using these mechanisms as a recruitment strategy for underrepresented medicine and science faculty. So many of the mentees that I work with, I'm helping them to write K99 ROOs because those are those mechanisms that really give them a leverage to get a job after they finish their postdoc. So I will be reaching out early on in that first year of postdoc to really help them start to write this so they can extend that K for the K99 period and then move into that ROO and leverage a faculty position wherever they want to go. K12s are the same way that allow them to then leverage to Rs and even go from a K12 to a K23 or things like that. And so the key take home is that I think mentoring is so important that I build it around the grants and provide infrastructure for it to happen. And I think especially as you mentor underrepresented in medicine and science faculty that you need to be able to bring that infrastructure to commit to providing opportunities for them. Second C is curriculum. So I very much lead with the idea that you can't just do mentoring and say you're doing mentoring. You have to have an idea about how you do it. And so I talk about it as curriculum. And so all of the mentees that I work with create a mission and vision statement. So again, as you narrow in on what you're doing, I then know the types of things to send your way, or sponsors know what kinds of positions or grants you're looking for or awards you're looking for. The more clear you can be around that, the better job you're going to be able to do to mentor and sponsor or coach. And so all of the mentees that I work with do this. They also, similar to me for my own mentoring approach, identify their own theoretical approach to research and career. So often this is also connected to their science. But I think it's really important to be crystal clear on that and what guides you, because it makes your research or your clinic or your educational vision and goals so much more clear. Then from that, I really do a strategic scaffolding approach where then other things might be sent their way, readings or things that are based on the needs of that specific mentee, but allow for that scaffolding to be tailored. The third C is connection. So I've spent a little time talking about this already, but the idea is that as a mentor, maybe you're not necessarily, if you're not also the sponsor, doing a lot of the actual, taking a lot of next steps from the connecting, but you're still providing those networking opportunities and the publishing opportunities and the co-presenting opportunities with the mentee. So I often, when I do work in my own university and kind of train the trainer models around mentoring, I talk immediately about, let me see your resume and how many on here are mentees that you've published with or you've presented with. Does it show up in your own science that you've done this and provided those connections for them? The fourth thing then is communication. I think you've seen that as a thread throughout all that I've been talking about. But the key thing here is that in whatever role you take on and as you're a mentor, being clear about what you communicate as your role with that mentee is really important. And then, as I said, I really do think it's a responsibility to present and publish on that as an important part of science and moving it forward. And I would say, especially in an area in which I think we're continuing to try to build and understanding better how to do a great job mentoring underrepresented in medicine and science. I think that moving forward with publishing and making sure it's part of the science is really going to inform and help others to really do and find best practice in this area. So let me move to this other mentee highlight, and it will reinforce some of those 4 C's that I just talked about. So as you can see over here, this is a junior faculty, and as far as identities, she identifies as a BIPOC woman and first-generation college student. In this situation, her and I talked about what would make best sense as far as my role in her community of mentors. And I was definitely someone who had good content expertise and would be a great mentor for her. At the same time, there was lots of opportunities for sponsorship with her. And so we decided that I would be a mentor and a sponsor, in addition to bringing on some other sponsors. So as you can see, this is very strategic. You really have these conversations early on to build out that community of mentors approach. And so early on, we identified a couple other sponsors, again, did some advocating emails on behalf of her to say, reaching out as wanting to add them to her community of mentor team and be a sponsor. And then, of course, after that point, she takes it from there and has those conversations with them about the role of being a sponsor. Early on, had her draft a mission and vision statement and be really clear on what it was what she was looking for in her career and for her research in particular, and the research that she wanted to do and how that would then build into what her career development plan needed to be. So in this case, I was working to put in a diversity supplement for this junior faculty on one of my grants. And so this is that key thing of building the infrastructure to make sure that there is ways to support junior faculty coming in as a mentor. So I very much, as you saw, build in funding as ways to bring on students and faculty with diversity supplements, et cetera. But a key thing here is I decide early on, to bring them on regardless of whether the supplement is going to happen or not. You have to have that commitment, as I said before, that shows that person that you're going to bring them on to your study team or to your research and pay for their effort on your research, regardless of whether that supplement is funded or not. And so in this case, I brought on this junior faculty at a % effort onto the grant and then worked on the supplement together. And it wasn't dependent on whether that supplement was funded or not. And so it did successfully get funded though, and that it was a great celebration. And then was able, because it was on an RO1 grant that hadn't, it wasn't only the first year in, so it wasn't very long into the grant, was able to build in like a 4-year component to that. And so you can really get a really nice long time for that junior faculty if you can make that case of why a 4-year period on a supplement would make sense on that grant. This is also a faculty that I think is important to note. In between grad school and grad school, so like master's to PhD grad school, this mentee had taken a 2-year break. And so she had gone to help out family with some health issues and was gone for 2 years. And I think a key thing here that I want to make a really strong impression about is continuing to reach out in that time period. So I made a lot of effort to check in, over those 2 years to just see where she was at and how things were going, and making it clear that at any point, we would pick back up where we left off. And so that makes a big difference. And she did end up coming back and finishing up that PhD, and then came, did a postdoc, and now when I'm, this specific stage of life now is junior faculty and doing a stellar job. But a key thing is just really keeping those check-ins along the way as life happens. The other thing here was key to connect her also to other research labs. She wanted to learn a new kind of technology for her research. And so there's another lab doing that kind of work. And so again, really to advocate or bridge an introduction for her, that happened. And she now has kind of this really cool niche in her research that she's brought what I've taught her, what this other person's taught her, and she now has emerged as this really cool, innovative space of doing her own research. So with that, I will close for some questions with a couple thoughts. How has mentoring looked like in your career, whether you're the mentee or mentor? What questions might you have? And really looking forward to a conversation from all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Burge. That was amazing. I don't think I've heard someone talk about mentorship and sponsorship and coaching in such an intentional and strategic way. So thank you for that. It's really great. So we'll take questions now. I see that we do have one question in the chat. Others, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And I think our group is also small enough if anyone wants to come off of mute and ask their question, they can do that too. But we'll first start with the question that's in the chat. Who is usually responsible for sponsorship scavenging? Main mentor, other mentor, or mentee? And then there's also a second question, is what is your approach for sponsorship scavenging for international mentees?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, great questions. And a lot of it will come back to, the communication C that I was talking about. I definitely have a conversation about again, whose role is it and who's going to do which component of it. And so it's sometimes the main mentor, it's sometimes the secondary mentor or another mentor on there. And often it has to do with who has the connections or more stronger connections with that person that we're trying to connect sponsorship with. If it's within the team, we talk about who could be a good sponsor. If it's us trying to look outside the team for sponsors, we strategize around who are other people that we can think of that will be sponsors. I mean, again, a lot of this has to do with within my research lab. Our team believes in this approach, and so we literally do have meetings where we talk about like the mentees on our team and who's doing which role, whether it's sponsorship or coaching or for connecting them with others. And so it can really differ on depending on the need and the goal. And so we share that a bit. And I don't know how satisfying that answer is to you, but it really is about like identifying the need and who can do it and if it's internal or external. With regard to your question about international, same kind of thing. I mean, we're always, so on, again, my team, we're doing presentations internationally all the time. And when we go to international in person, but pre-COVID and also probably after, and even on, virtual ones, we're always trying to make sure we're connecting globally as well. That's a strong interest of a lot of my colleagues that I work with as well. And so it's a similar approach. It's very much strategic. Are you looking out for people? Are you, having people on your radar in all the different situations you're at? And so the approach really is that when we are at conferences, we are going to presentations for potential mentees who might be from international spaces. We also have a lot who reach out to us. Some of my research, there's key other research labs in different parts of the country. And so we'll often like swap between those key labs, and sometimes whether it's actual like visiting opportunities for that mentee to go to different labs, or short-term coaching opportunities or whatever it might be. But I think as you're hearing from me, it has to be very strategic and it has to be very planned and thoughtful.
Okay, thank you. I do have a follow-up question about the sponsorship piece of identifying sponsors, because, sponsorship is such an active role. I mean, you really do have to be intentional to be an effective sponsor. So how do you, know that someone is going to actually be a good sponsor?
Yeah. So that's true, because as I was mentioning, often sponsors are people who have even more responsibilities, and so the time is really limited. So usually in a sponsorship type of conversation, it's usually about a very specific thing. So I would really, you identify what it is you're wanting to get sponsorship for. So if it's an award, usually it's very specific around that key award. I'd like you to sponsor me for this award, and this is what it takes or whatever to do this award. And these are the things that I've already thought about. If it's within our own, like my own research lab, like that conversation is happening all the time because we're looking at this list of awards or like leadership opportunities that we have and putting people forward without them even approaching us. Often, like we usually approach them. And so, it can be the case that someone approaches you, but often it's you approaching them. And so you look for someone who will, obviously you think will be able to advance you in that specific request, but that it's very concrete and specific, or like an award, for instance. And then, it's you identify the time-bound nature of it. I mean, I think that when a sponsor hears this specific thing for this amount of time, and this is the specific things it takes, that's when they can make the decision about whether they can do it or not. So it's very much about communication being concrete and in the ask, and the role and responsibility of the person asking what they're going to do and what you're asking the sponsor to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So our other question in the chat, Alex Zhang says, thank you for this wonderful presentation. Do you have any suggestions on how to have the first conversation with a potential mentor or sponsor, particularly deciding which is more appropriate?
Yeah, those are the first step is asking yourself that. So that's great. So you yourself are thinking through like who should be a mentor, who should be a sponsor. And so as you think that through, those are actually the things that you will say in that introductory email or the introductory conversation that you have with that person. So often for a first, often this happens right through an email, just to reach out to see if you can even have a conversation. And so some of the advice that we give our mentees and others, and what I, as myself, when I was in my early stage of career would do, is that in that first email, identifying like the area of interest that you think is compatible. So it's something, if you're reaching out to me, it would be around like, I know that you do mixed methods research with regard to families and health research, and this is a big area of interest of mine. And then I tell people to be very specific. I would like to talk to you about the opportunity that might be available for mentoring. And if you want to say and or sponsorship, or if you're specifically about sponsorship, then I would actually even alter it to be even more concrete. There's this award I would like to go for, and given your expertise and knowledge, or a good match with what this award is looking for, I would like to ask if you'd be willing to sponsor me for this. I'd like to set up a time to talk with you about it. So again, depending on the nature of what your ask is, just very concrete about what the ask is, just saying straight out mentoring or sponsorship or coaching. And I think sometimes people are reluctant because they're like, I put that in there and it's like a huge commitment. But I actually find it to be the opposite, that if you're really transparent and straightforward, then people know what you're asking for. And then when you move to that conversation to ask for the mentoring or sponsorship role more clearly, the person's not like caught off guard in the conversation of the depth of what you're asking for.
Okay. All right. The next question is from Ed Ellerbeck. He asked, can you comment on ELAM or similar experiences to promote career development?
Yes. So ELAM, you probably maybe know what ELAM is, but it's Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine. So I will be someone who sings its praises because I am an ELAM, so an alumni of ELAM. I think it is a very strong transformative experience as far as career development of faculty who identify as women. And at the same time, I also think there's other programs that are local at your own institution or even at the AAMC level that have similar opportunities. So I do think that having specific training around career development is a benefit. So taking trainings like ELAM is one you have to, put an application for or be nominated for, and is a good example of who, would be a sponsor to help you do that. And then the other ones that are more local or even at the association level, similarly, I think engaging in one of those is always useful. They just really help you kind of think about a little bit maybe more strategically the things that, some of the stuff I've talked about today about how important it is to be strategic and intentional in your career development as much as it is in your research career to have like a great specific aims page, or in your clinical career to really be able to say your expertise. It's the same thing. You have to take your career development as serious as those and have training around it. So I'm a big fan of having at least one kind of opportunity or so to be able to really have the opportunity to think about career development.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I was wondering, I've not seen someone have a mission and vision around mentoring. Is that something that came out of some of the kind of development through ELAM, or like how did you come up with that concept of having a vision and mission around mentoring itself?
Yeah. There's probably someone who also did this, so I don't necessarily want to say I'm like the first person who ever did this, but I think it's more about for me, it was like an obvious thing that I felt like I needed to do, given that you're always told to do a mission and vision statement for your research, or often are, or about your educational approach or your clinical approach. So to me, it made a lot of sense to do that for mentoring. I would say that training programs do have you think about your career mission and vision, and all I did was kind of make it specific to mentoring. So if you do a career training, they will have you think through like what is your mission and vision for your career. And so it's really just applying that concept to mentoring, and I think it's just really useful. And so that's how I have done it and encouraged others to think about, especially as you move into mid-career and senior career, like as part of your paying it forward kind of approach and how you're giving back, to think about writing your own mission and vision statement for your mentoring.
Right. I think Ed had a follow-up question about ELAM. Could you elaborate on how you work with others in your institution to identify and recruit potential mentees to your institution? Isn't that something you've had to do explicitly on your K-12?
So that is often a way that you use the K-12 mechanism. So you can use it as a recruitment strategy. And so at the same time, they can also be internal, just so people know they can actually be internal candidates. But it is a great way to use a recruitment strategy and to really draw and potentially be attractive to faculty who are underrepresented in medicine and science. So that is one of the ways in which we have used the K-12. And so this is also really about networking. So the other institutions that you have connections with. So you heard me talk about CTSI before. So we closely collaborate with their KL2 program. So it's the same kind of idea where they do career development award. It's an institutional award. It's just called something different. So we will shoot out at the different CTSIs, just like we do for them when they're attracting scholars, and try to blast opportunities there. That's one way we do that. We also, as people who are involved with Birch, so the PIs and the mentors on that award, are always actively looking to attract other, mentees who would be appropriate for a K-12. So we've tried to develop like networks that all of us have at different institutions where we do research that have like postdocs. So I am also core faculty. I'm a T32. And so of course, that's where often you get those students, is if you can reach out to the T32 programs and advertise the K-12 programs. Also, those are also the ways you can kind of get the ROO awardees that are doing their K-99 institutes, we often will sometimes look up in Reporter and reach out to people who have those K-99 ROOs. Just lots of different ways like that that are just kind of strategies to really try to draw or attract. And then, of course, just I do it a lot at conferences. Honestly, just as much as ESIs are trying to network at conferences, I think, again, if you're taking a mentoring approach seriously, you as a mentor are networking to also attract, postdocs as well as junior faculty to your institution.
Okay, great. I don't see any more questions in the chat. This has been a great presentation and great discussion. Dr. Burge, I'll leave you last words. If there's any last words that you would like to say before I close us out.
Well, I think the biggest one is just like, as you think about either being a mentee or a mentor, like to just really think about it in that intentional way and very strategic way, as much as you care about your own research agenda. That's my pitch, is that people take mentoring that seriously.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much. So thank you again to Dr. Burge for this presentation today, and thanks everyone for joining. Please tune in next week. We'll have a panel discussion of underrepresented in medicine science junior researchers who will discuss their experiences in regards to mentorship and sponsorship. So please join us again next week. And again, thanks all for joining.